The Soviet Union is known to have created some of the most influential tanks in the world, starting from the T-34 and the KV-1, which would later develop into the T-34-85 and IS series of heavy tanks. But then there are also some Soviet tanks which are so mind-boggling cursed, it truly makes you wonder how did we get here. So today we are going to take a look at some interesting concept vehicles and paper tanks, and also a few that are a bit more well known. So be sure to buckle up, comrade.
You go to Gulag.
So we'll start off with a bit of a controversial one, that being the T-35. It's quite a well known vehicle, but for those that don't know, you can already see just by looking at the thing, it's questionable at best. The tank actually started development before the Second World War in 1930, and that was led by OKMO. It was supposed to be the bigger version of the T-28 medium tank, which was in and of itself also not the most stellar of vehicles. The most noticeable feature is without a doubt the multi-turret layout, and this was supposedly done to increase the firepower of tanks, as tanks were quite a new weapon in 1930. The thing used one main 76mm KT-28 gun and two 45mm 20K guns mounted in modified turrets of the BT-5 tank. Two decorative turrets were also on the vehicle, housing 7.6 DT machine guns. Now back then they didn't have ChatGPT to do the work for them, so the entire tank had to be operated by a crew of 10 comrades. And to house all those guns, the vehicle had to be almost 10 meters long. It was also quite tall and wide. You can also imagine that the vehicle would be quite heavy, sitting at 45 tons. The engine it used was a V12 petrol engine giving out 500 horsepower. The maximum speed was therefore only 30 km per hour. Not so fast, really. Now this would have been fine if the vehicle actually had decent armor for being a heavy tank. But the thickest part was only 30mm, which is just not gonna do it. Not many were produced, as the Soviets themselves realized this thing was horribly out of date. But some were still around by the time of Operation Barbarossa. As the Soviets panicked, they just decided to send everything in there, including the T-35s. The vehicle had so many reliability problems that most of them broke down before they could even engage enemy troops. It was one of the few Allied tanks even more prone to breakdowns than late German tanks. So besides looking good and impressive for propaganda posters, up to 90% of all T-35s were lost and only one original T-35 is on display in Kubinka Tank Museum. But there's actually a replica of it, which has got to be one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Now this thing right here is quite a mess of a vehicle. It has KV in it, but it's by far not as good as the KV-1. This thing had three main guns in an immobile turret. It really was just a casemate. It used a U-30 gun system, which consisted of one 76mm gun in the middle and two 45mm next to it. To improve the crew conditions, the casemate would spread out the lower it would go, which caused the casemate to hang over the fenders. The thing also had to use as many KV-1 components as possible to just keep it simple. Now, due to hurry and pressure from CHKZ, the project was quite rushed, and when the prototype was finished, a lot of problems were found. For once, there was no sight ready and included on the vehicle, and you can imagine that firing three guns led to not so great accuracy, with the tank having high dispersion when firing. So when the thing underwent trials, it was rejected due to low accuracy and rate of fire. But the designers decided to not give up just yet and create a newer version of the KV set. Yeah! Armor would be increased to 120mm and it would mount two guns instead of three. Both of those would be 76mm for equal rate of fire. But they did not make a new vehicle, they just decided to replace the three guns of the old KV-7 prototype with two CIS-5 guns. Low prioritization meant that the vehicle was not completed until March of 1942, with trials starting in May. Trials showed that the accuracy was just as bad as the three-armed one, with sight shifting after each shot. More problems were found, such as the fact that the ammunition storage was inconvenient, and the turning mechanism had to be operated with both hands, likely leaving to a not so pleased driver. As well, it had poor visibility and it was based off the KV-1, which therefore meant mobility was quite low as well. After trials, the thing would end up in storage at factory number 100 and it was left to die there until it was scrapped in 1943. Not much else came of it besides another proposal, but this time it would use a 152mm howitzer from the Su-152. This concept was also scrapped, as the 152mm guns were quite low in numbers and the Su-152 was already doing fine. So this might be a bit of a surprise to some of you, but I decided to put the IS-6 on the list. Development started after the IS-5, no, not that one, but this IS-5 was rejected. The thing had insane requirements for 1944. It had to be completely immune against 88mm rounds, and it was planned to use the 122mm BL-13 gun. But snapping back to reality, the designers realized that gun simply wasn't available yet, so it was decided to go with the D-30T gun. It would use a supercharged version of the V12 giving out 800 horsepower. As well, it had a new suspension which used larger diameter road wheels. This was done to remove the return rollers, and the designers believed that these road wheels would be better than the old one. In November of 1944, the prototype Object 252 was ready to begin testing. And my god, considering all the efforts the designers put into it, the result must have been terrible. While the tank was indeed immune to 8.8cm rounds, even as close as 15 meters, it did not come without a cost. That cost being that crew comfort was thrown straight out the window. There was also no hatch for the gunner and the visibility of the commander was poor. This thing was also grueling to drive, just like other Soviet tanks. Not only did the drive have poor visibility, but he was cramped and his head was pressed against the sloped frontal plate the entire time. Not only that, the suspension also completely screwed up. In the total of 820 kilometers of testing, 14 road wheels had to be replaced, only lasting 200 kilometers on average. But there's more. Operating the gearbox was not only difficult, but it would heat up to insane temperatures of over 100 degrees. Not that comfortable, to be honest. Compared to other Soviet heavy tanks in development, such as the IS-3, the IS-6 failed miserably. The designers decided to create an even more revolutionary design, that being IS-6-2, or Object 253. This thing would use the same suspension as the IS-2 so that they didn't have to bother with the unreliable road wheels. But most noticeably, it would use an electromechanical transmission. When Object 253 began trials, after 10 kilometers the vehicle caught fire due to the transmission overheating, and that put an end to the project. So this is a very cursed vehicle. It raises all sorts of questions just by looking at it, and this is the A-44. It was supposed to be an improved successor to the A-43, aka the T-34. Now I can see no world where this would have been better than the T-34, but believe it or not, the only reason this project got cancelled is due to the invasion of the Soviet Union. If it wasn't for the Germans barging in, they would have made this nightmare a reality. The thing had 6 machine guns, which is even more than the average American tank, and a turret in the rear can create numerous problems from low crew comfort to gun depression being low. As the driver would have been located at the front and the commander at the rear, communication was also not optimal. And believe it or not, there were also actually plans to upgun this thing. Instead of using the 76mm ZIS-5, it would have used the 107mm ZIS-6. Which would create even more problems, and my god, I am glad this thing stayed as a concept vehicle. This is a German Panther tank. And this is a Soviet Panther tank. The project of the TV-85 can be traced back to 1944. And it was part of a project of rearming enemy equipment. They would remove their German guns, put in Soviet guns, so that they could rely on Soviet ammunition and therefore it would increase their service life. Not only the Panther, but Panzer IV, Tiger I, and yes, even the Tiger II was Sovietized. Now that sounds insane, but the ZIS S53 85mm gun was actually a pretty good replacement for the Panther turret. But it was not easy. It would take a whopping 122 hours of work to complete the conversion. And all of that just to install an 85mm gun, which was actually way worse than the KWK-42 the Panther was armed with. Which was not stonks, as they were hereby downgrading the vehicle to keep it in service. What's even worse is the fact that it's a Panther tank. Panther tanks are known to be not so reliable, and the engineers decided to not bother about replacing both the engine and transmission, and let's just not even talk about the poor final drive. So best of luck to whichever mechanic had to repair it, or even worse, field repairs, as there is no or limited reserve parts and a lack of crew experience to deal with foreign equipment. Which is another problem, as it basically relies on the Red Army capturing panther tanks. And I, unfortunately, I'm no magic magician, but I do not know of any way to capture those panther tanks on regular basis. It just simply doesn't work out. And after all of that, the Soviets came to the conclusion, "Oh comrade, we should have just stuck to using the T-34-85. It's not like you have to be well educated on this. Even I came to the conclusion to just not worry about foreign equipment, but rather produce your own stuff." Oh, whoa, alright. After 8 hours of editing, this man right here is pretty tired. Yeah, now I know how people like Table Size must feel. Which brings me on to my next point, that this video was heavily inspired by him. So I want to thank him, because he also had a lot of good information in his videos. So yeah, be sure to check his channel out, link in the description or something, if I have enough energy. But yeah, what now? I regret informing myself about these vehicles, about these things, but well, it's done, I suppose. Comrade, make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and до свидания, or something, I guess.